You're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunema here with my colleague Nora Barros-Friedman on Wednesday evening, 2 years and a day after the resistance operation and the start of Israel's genocide on October 7, 2023. US President Donald Trump announced an agreement to bring an end to the slaughter. It has not stopped yet, with the health ministry in Gaza announcing that Israel had killed at least 10 Palestinians and injured dozens more over the last 24 hours. But the announcement has brought joy to Palestinians in Gaza, desperate for an end to Israel's daily massacres, starvation, and destruction. Here's one of the many scenes of joy among people in Gaza on hearing the news. Well, President Trump announced the news on his Truth Social website. He said, "I'm very proud to announce that that Israel and Hamas have both signed off on the first phase of our peace plan. This means that all of the hostages will be released very soon, and Israel will withdraw their troops to an agreed upon line as the first steps toward a strong, durable, and everlasting peace. All parties will be treated fairly. This is a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations in the United States of America. And we thank the mediators Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey who worked with us to make this historic and unprecedented event happen. Blessed are the peacemakers." President Trump, as usual, understating things. Majid al-Ansari, the spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry of Qatar, which, as President Trump said, along with Turkey and Egypt, has been mediating the talks in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh over the last few days, confirmed an agreement, albeit with more cautious language, and he emphasized the benefits for the Palestinian side. Al-Ansari wrote, "The mediators announced that tonight an agreement was reached on all the provisions and implementation mechanisms of the first phase of the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which will lead to ending the war, the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners, and the entry of aid. The details will be announced later." Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also announced that an agreement had been reached, but in his post on Twitter, he makes no mention of ending the war, let alone peace. Netanyahu said, "With the approval of the first phase of the plan, all our hostages will be brought home. This is a diplomatic success and a national and moral victory for the state of Israel. From the beginning, I made it clear we will not rest until all our hostages return and all our goals are achieved." Netanyahu speaks as if Israel has in fact achieved all the goals that it set out at the beginning of its genocide, even though it is clear it has not. Instead of destroying Hamas, Israel was forced to negotiate with it. Israel could have had all its prisoners back 2 years ago, but instead has killed dozens of them while committing genocide in Gaza. And under this deal, it may get the bodies back of some of those Israelis it killed. From the Israeli side, the deal has to be approved by the so-called Security Cabinet, and that meeting is scheduled for tonight. For its part, Hamas released a statement saying the agreement stipulated, quote, "an end to the war on Gaza, the occupation's withdrawal from it, the entry of aid, and a prisoner exchange." Hamas also thanked Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey and Trump for their mediation efforts and called on Trump and others to, quote, "compel the occupation government to fully implement the agreement's requirements." "We salute our great people in the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem, and the West Bank who have demonstrated unparalleled pride, heroism, and honor," Hamas said. "These great sacrifices and stances have thwarted the Israeli occupation's plan for subjugation and displacement." Hamas added that it, quote, "will not abandon our people's national rights to achieve freedom, independence, and self-determination." What we can say 2 years into the genocide is that despite the horrific death and destruction Israel has inflicted, and for which Israel and its backers, not the resistance, bear full and complete responsibility, Israel's fantasies of expelling the population of Gaza and resettling it appear to have crumbled. Israel is left with a devastated economy, a depleted and demoralized army, and it is absolutely hated, despised, and isolated around the world. At the same time, the legitimacy of the Palestinian struggle for liberation has never been higher or enjoyed wider support. But no one should be under any illusions. Israel remains highly dangerous and desperate. This reported agreement is, as noted, only a first phase. It addresses none of the bigger questions in Trump's so-called 20-point peace plan released last week. Those issues include a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, the future governance of Gaza, and American plans to try to impose neo-colonial rule by Tony Blair, and the disarmament of the weapons of the resistance while Israel gets to keep its weapons of genocide. Despite Trump's bombast, we are very far from anything that resembles peace. That doesn't matter to Palestinians in Gaza who are celebrating today and deserve to celebrate what we hope will be an imminent end to the slaughter. But clearly, there is a lot to unpack and understand about what's happening, and we're joined now by Jeremy Scahill. He is the co-founder of Dropsite News, where he has been closely following the negotiations and reporting exclusive stories from Palestinian resistance sources. On the 7th of October, just 2 days ago, he published an exclusive interview with Musa Abu Marzouk, a senior member of Hamas. Jeremy, welcome back to the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Ali, it's my honor to be with you.
Hi, Jeremy.
Hey, Nora. Great to see you too.
You too.
Thanks, Jeremy. In your latest story published last night on Dropsite News, you quote a senior Hamas official confirming that, quote, from our side, yes, the Palestinians reached an agreement, but they still needed to finalize some points. And a second source told you, it's over, it's been decided, everybody's agreed on it. Well, there's still a lot of questions to answer. What is your understanding of exactly what has been agreed in this so-called first phase, what remains to be agreed, and what we can expect to see over the next few days? What were some of the key calculations for the resistance, and what are you learning in particular about which Palestinians may be released from Israeli prisons?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, it's helpful to understand something that often is totally unmentioned in broader corporate Western media coverage, and that is while Hamas is leading the negotiations throughout the course of the genocide, when it's gone into these processes to try to negotiate the exchange of captives, issues surrounding aid, a ceasefire or withdrawal, they consult with a wide range of other political actors in Palestine. You know, it's a very diverse tapestry of political perspective, mobilizations, organizations, and that has intensified really greatly since Israel blew up that original January ceasefire deal. And so, you know, just to back up a little bit here, on August 18th, Hamas and the resistance, with the full support of every basically political entity in Palestine except Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, made major concessions in what was called the Witkoff framework. This was the deal that Israel and the United States demanded the Palestinians accept in return for ending the genocide. They accepted that deal on August 18th. Israel did not formally respond to it at all. The United States ignored it. And the official response of Israel came in the form of an attempt to assassinate the entire negotiating delegation of Hamas in a series of airstrikes in Doha, Qatar. And those strikes failed to kill any of the senior Hamas leadership. They killed several office workers and assistants in that strike, but they also killed the son of Khalil al-Hayya, who has lost other sons to this war inside of Gaza. They injured Khalil al-Hayya's wife. This is the political leader of Hamas outside of the Strip right now, and the lead negotiator, and wounded his daughter-in-law and multiple grandchildren. That was Israel's response to Hamas's acceptance with major concessions of a deal just weeks ago that the United States has said was the deal that would end this. So Khalil al-Hayya then leads the negotiating delegation and has to sit in a room not so far from the very Israelis who tried to assassinate him and in fact did kill his son and wounded multiple members of his family, including his grandchildren in that strike. Dr. Mohammed al-Hindi, the lead political negotiator from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also joined the negotiating delegation because Saraya al-Quds, the armed wing of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, is also holding an unknown number of those Israeli captives or bodies. And then you also had representatives of the leftist PFLP who also formally joined the negotiation. This was an unusual development. And what this showed was that the Palestinians were trying to send a message that they were not just speaking on behalf of Hamas, but that these groups were representing a broader cross-section of Palestinian society. And what had happened in these deliberations among the Palestinians once they were given Trump's so-called 20-point plan is that they came to a decision through deliberation and also with consulting with the ground commanders in Gaza from the armed forces, the Palestinian armed forces, as well as the political leadership inside of Gaza. And there was a debate. There was part of the camp that said we should reject this for all the reasons we're laying out, Ali. This is a neo-colonialist plan. This is an attempt to force the surrender of the Palestinian cause of self-determination, liberation, and ultimate statehood. And then there were others who were saying, you know, our only options right now are to continue the war and to continue that war now that all of these Arab countries have been cajoled, blackmailed, or willingly went along with the Trump narrative, that it would be fully supported by the United States, and that the sort of devil's bargain that they might have to engage in, or this gamble, was to try to see if they could thread a needle. And what they came up with was an extraordinary political response. It was short, but it was quite sophisticated. The Palestinians came back and they said, listen, we accept the basic framework of Trump's plan to end the Gaza war, to end the Gaza genocide. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad, as the lead combatants in fighting against Israel in this war, have the mandate of Palestine to negotiate an end to this war because we're the ones fighting it and we hold the captives. But for these other issues involving Tony Blair, involving the deployment of a foreign force, involving disarmament, because it's not just about Hamas giving up weapons. What Israel is trying to do is win through this agreement what it has systematically failed to achieve in Gaza, which is forcing the surrender of the Palestinian people. It's not just about Hamas. They are trying to strip the entire population of Palestine of the right to armed resistance. And so what the Palestinians came back with was to say, let's talk about captives, let's talk about aid, let's talk about the genocide, and let's talk about the withdrawal of Israeli forces. All of these other issues need to be deferred, and they need to involve the participation of every political actor within Palestinian society representing a democratic will of the Palestinian people. That was the response. Shockingly, to some Palestinian negotiators, Trump responds to this and says, great news, Hamas has responded positively, and it seems like they want peace and we can make a deal. So then you had all the delegations descending on Sharm el-Sheikh, and I was told by Palestinian resistance sources who were involved with the negotiations that unprecedented pressure was being put on the Palestinians primarily by Egypt and Turkey. Qatar, I'm told, was a little more neutral and kept emphasizing this has to be a Palestinian decision, but Egypt and Turkey were basically saying, you need to make a deal here. In the end, they also acknowledged it was a Palestinian decision, but I was told there was immense pressure. And so what they looked at was how to address ending the genocide. That was the immediate challenge in front of them without sacrificing any of the rights of Palestinians to exist or to resist. And so what they did is they made a massive concession. They said, we are willing to hand over all of the living and deceased Israeli captives without a very clear timeline for the withdrawal of all Israeli occupation forces. They accepted only this initial, Abu Marzouk compared it to drawing maps of like camel races. He was almost mocking the maps that were released as part of this proposal. But if you look at it, the map that Trump released, it's a very slight pullback or redeployment of Israeli forces deep into Gaza. So the Israelis have agreed to withdraw forces from some population centers. The Palestinians were able to win some concessions to get them a little bit further back in some areas where they were going to dip deeply into population areas, but it still is very entrenched in Gaza. And so they'll withdraw to that line as part of the process of the exchange of captives. The next stages of Israeli withdrawal are going to be linked to all of those other issues that the Palestinians succeeded in deferring, and they're hoping that it will be with a much broader cross-section of Palestinian society. So they're going to hand over the Israelis. There is some issue of whether they can track down all of these deceased bodies. As you mentioned, Ali, the Israelis killed many of their own captives that were being held by the resistance. And in some cases, Hamas has said, We don't know the precise location, or they're in buildings that were bombed by Israel, or they're in tunnels that were demolished by Israel, or we had buried them temporarily in proper cemeteries alongside Palestinians that you now have bulldozed. In fact, Abu Marzouk said that the graves of his own parents were bulldozed by the Israelis when they razed Rafah to the ground. So there was an issue of whether this was going to hold up any sort of an agreement. It seems like they've agreed that maybe even some international forensic experts are going to come in to try to go and track down some of those bodies. In return, Trump's plan said that there would be 250 Palestinians that have been sentenced to life terms. It's in Israeli prisons, gulags, jails, torture centers, and then 1,700 Palestinians that had been seized from Gaza in the aftermath of October 7th. My understanding from resistance sources is that there may be well over 4,000 Palestinians that were taken by Israel, either because they were captured during the Al-Aqsa flood operation, or they were literally kidnapped to use for this purpose, for an exchange of captives. And you have several hundred children, and you have women. And so it says in the agreement that all of the women and children are going to be released as part of this exchange. There's been a very intense battle going on right up to the moment that I'm speaking to you now, because the Palestinian resistance has put forward always at the top of the list the Palestinian sentenced to the longest sentences. We're talking about people like Marwan Barghouti, who many believe could win a democratic election to become head of state of independent Palestine. He's not from Hamas, he's from Fatah. And he's serving 5 life sentences. You have Ahmed Sadat, who is from the PFLP, who's also serving multiple life sentences and is in fact the official leader of the PFLP, which is a left-wing Palestinian political movement. Again, not Hamas, but at the top of the list. Abdullah Barghouti, who is serving a longer sentence than any other Palestinian, 5,200 year sentence, 67 life sentences, and the list goes on from there. So the Palestinians have said one of the goals of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood on October 7th was to liberate these Palestinian prisoners, and so they've always put them forward. And there's others too serving multiple life sentences. The Israelis have systematically said we will not allow these people to be released. The Palestinians are pushing back very hard. Maybe they're going to succeed in getting some of them out. But just one vignette that I was told by a Palestinian close to the negotiations is that their assessment was that if they were dealing with Biden's people, there was an ideological commitment to Zionism, and that the Biden officials in these things actually would adopt the Israeli position about Marwan Barghouti or Abdullah Barghouti or Ahmed Sadat. And I was told that the Trump people don't even seem to really understand who these people are or their relevance. And at one point, they said that they had heard that the Americans were saying to the Israelis, well, but we're talking about 5 or 6 guys, just let them out, and which, of course, I'm sure infuriated Ron Dermer. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to succeed, but it just kind of shows you the dynamics at play here, the difference between dealing with Trump's people and dealing with Biden's people. The end result may be the same. Maybe none of these guys are going to be freed, but they're fighting very hard for it. So that issue is really that, and some technical details about the maps are happening. I think it's going to get resolved. I don't think this is going to derail the agreement. But to close my sort of long-winded explanation here, the short of it is this. Palestinian resistance sources are saying that they understand they're taking a very dangerous, calculated risk because it ultimately boils down to Trump and whether or not Trump is going to compel the Israelis to end the genocide. Whether Trump, and just as we were going on the air, Trump told a press conference that informally was taking place at a cabinet meeting that he has ended the war in Gaza. That was something the mediators told the Palestinian side he was going to say publicly, that he is ending the war in Gaza. And he just said it as we were coming onto the air. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean they're going to still let Israel mow the lawn, quote unquote? That they're going to be continuously bombing as they do in Lebanon and as they've done in previous ceasefires? Probably it means that for now. But does it mean that Trump is serious about getting all of those Israeli forces out of Gaza? Could be, but we don't know. So the Palestinians feel like what they succeeded in doing here was listening to the will of the people of Gaza, who wanted an end to this genocide and wanted a deal, overwhelmingly wanted a deal to happen. They didn't necessarily want the Trump deal, and that's why they didn't accept the Trump deal. They accepted a tactical, narrow aspect of this, which they felt was a strategic victory for them because they've deferred these questions so they can try to make sure that all Palestinians have a say in what comes next. they also didn't surrender. They also didn't agree to disarmament or demilitarization. And Mohammed al-Hindi, who, as I said, is the top political negotiator for Islamic Jihad, he told me soon before this agreement that if Israel violates the agreement, we'll have our weapons, we'll have our resilience, we'll have our steadfastness, and we will have means to resist them. We are not going to surrender to them, and they haven't surrendered. So they're facing a very uncertain political path because of the nature of Trump, because of the bloodthirsty, genocidal nature of Netanyahu, because Netanyahu is still messaging to his public that he's going to continue his war of annihilation. But there may be a configuration of interests that have to do with Trump's ego, that have to do with profit, that have to do with the fact that Jared Kushner is getting bankrolled by Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. That Trump wants this because he thinks he's going to get his Riviera. That Trump cares more about his family business than he does Zionism on a kind of micro level. This is a committed Zionist administration in Washington, but Trump is an erratic and unusual character. So, and the Palestinian negotiators these are incredibly intelligent and sophisticated people, and they understand the man that they're dealing with. And I think that their perspective is they had to take some hits to the jaw in what they negotiated, but they felt that they did the best they could for the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. That's their perspective.
Go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, there's so many. First of all, Jeremy, you brilliantly answered all the questions I threw at you, and some of the ones that we're still wanted to ask, but we're going to dig deeper on all of them. I mean, just on that last point that you put, that a lot depends on Trump and on his ego and on his erratic nature and all of that, and nobody doubts that. Musa Abu Marzouk said that in the interview that you did with him in the last few days. They understand his erratic nature, and they said, but everyone is dealing with that. Israel is also dealing with his erratic nature. But what about, what is it about this moment? Because a lot of the things you said were true in March when Trump allowed Israel to violate the ceasefire and return to full-scale genocide. A lot of those things were true in May when Hamas made another calculated gamble, or the resistance factions together made a calculated gamble and agreed to release the Israeli-American prisoner of war, Edan Alexander, in exchange for what they thought was a firm promise from the Americans that they would make Israel stop the genocide. And then Israel, the United States reneged on that. They didn't deliver. What I want to ask you is there something different about Israel's position now, in the sense that the Trump administration, notwithstanding Trump's personal idiosyncrasies, but the United States, let's say, and Israel's other staunch allies, the European powers or European non-powers, now see stopping this Holocaust as the only way to save Israel. In other words, is this a recognition of Israel's weakness on their part? It's notable, for example, as you said, Trump is talking about peace, about an end to the war. The Europeans are also talking about an end to the war. These are words they never wanted to use before. They never even wanted to talk about a ceasefire. They didn't want to use the word ceasefire. They would say truce. So is it also a recognition of Israel's strategic weakness? And my goodness, if we don't stop this now, Israel is going to go down the tubes completely.
Yeah, I mean, and no one covers the sort of actions and tactics of the armed resistance in Gaza better than this program and John Elmer's analyses. But I think the first factor we have to recognize here is that a nuclear armed serial killer masquerading as a nation state with the full backing of the United States has failed to impose a surrender on Palestinians wearing Adidas flip-flops, tracksuits, and operating with largely domestically manufactured weapons. They have failed to militarily defeat the armed Palestinian resistance, primarily from Qassam brigades and Soraya al-Quds. And I think that, while Trump may not dig into the minutia of all of this and why it happened, he's looking at a situation where, these Israeli captives are not going anywhere. They're in the hands of the Palestinian resistance. Netanyahu, who he's given carte blanche since he blew up the ceasefire agreement in March, is just succeeding only at one thing: killing large numbers of Palestinians, burning them alive in tents, inflaming the world. You have unprecedented isn't even a strong enough word, opposition to Israel in the world today. And so he's looking at that. And he himself said the other day that he sort of sees it as Netanyahu has driven Israel into the ground and Trump's giving them a lifeline, a lifeboat. But there's also domestic political considerations. Look at what's happening within his base. You're starting to see very prominent people that played a role in Trump's rise taking very strong stands against Israel and being concerned about the role of Israel in American politics. And so even in Trump world, the dynamics are shifting. I think what's different about, some of the other stages you were talking about is that Trump was much more susceptible to the ultra Zionist, players within his orbit and the people that had helped to bankroll his runs for the presidency. And I think that, he was also bombarded with the same kind of propaganda and images and films, et cetera, that Biden and others were bombarded with, during the last administration. So I think part of it is domestic. Part of it is that they realize Israel's not winning this war in military terms. Those are real factors. And I think that Trump, genuinely feels like he's wasting his time now on this. He has other things he wants to deal with. And I think he wants the glory of, I ended a war. He constantly talks about 3,000 years, no one's been able to solve it. And now I've solved it. I genuinely think that man is so thin-skinned on the one hand, but arrogant and egotistical on the other. He's obsessed with the fact that Barack Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize. I think he remains obsessed with that. So these are insane things to even be talking about as like motivations for a head of state of the United States, but they're real. These are real things. But at the end of the day, I think all of us need to be cognizant of the fact that Israel's genocidal agenda remains active. They may view this as a tactical or technical setback right now, but the Palestinian people, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in all of Palestinian territories, remain in the sniper scope of an incredibly dangerous serial killer. And I don't get the sense from any Palestinian involved with negotiating this that they are, whistling past that reality. They see it, and they're saying that what happens next is crucial. And we're going to have to see what the decrepit, unpopular Mahmoud Abbas has to say about any of this. We're going to have to see how Europe responds. I was watching Macron speaking right before we went on the air, and they're all leading with this thing about Hamas needs to go away. And there needs to be a disarmament. What they're actually saying is, we want Palestinians to fully surrender. We want Palestinians to give up on their actual aspirations and to exist in a European endorsed Bantustan in all of Palestine, and to do it willingly. They say, oh, Hamas has to go away. Hamas remains, if not the single most popular political party in all of Palestine, not just Gaza. It's certainly one of them are competing for it, even after everything that's happened the past 2 years, and even because of it in some cases. So you can't erase, if you say Hamas needs to go away and you want to erase HAMAS, or you want to say that acronym is gone, okay, try it. But that doesn't mean that they aren't representing a part of the fabric of Palestinian society. And if you believe in democracy, your position can't be, if the wrong people win, we sanction you, isolate you, confine you to a concentration camp, mow the lawn, and then commit a genocide on you when you dare to stand up and say, no, we have a right to resist occupation. That's what Europe is saying right now. And so what comes next is either going to go in the direction of some neo-Oslo process, which would be horribly depressing to so many Palestinians, because it means that they just drag something on while Israel annexes more, steals more, kills more, or Palestinians unite and then they put a challenge before the world. Are you going to go down in history as the people that continued to support this apartheid regime even after you recognize they committed a genocide against the Palestinian people?
Yeah, and of course, Macron and Starmer and everyone, no one is ever daring to suggest that Israel be the one to disarm.
Yeah.
And I mean, the perpetrators of the worst genocide we've seen in our modern history, they just get to carry on as usual, of course. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the possible guarantees, like what, as you said, Hamas and the Palestinian resistance is taking an enormous risk,
Yeah.
just in agreeing to release the Israeli captives. What guarantees are being talked about in order to ensure, I don't even know if
Yeah.
that's a word either, that Israel doesn't just say, okay, we got our captives back, and now we're going to finish the job in Gaza. I mean, is there any discussion on what guarantees could be and what they could look like?
I can answer that because I want to just be really factual about this. The way I'm going to answer that is by telling you what I was told the Palestinians were told. Now, I'm not saying that this is reality or what's going to be implemented, but I'm going to share what I heard about why they accepted this deal and in terms of those guarantees. The head of Turkish intelligence goes to Sharm el Sheikh and also had been involved with the earlier deliberations that were taking place in Qatar among the Palestinians as they decided how to respond to Trump. And then you had the prime minister and foreign minister, the same person of Qatar, join as well, and then the head of Egyptian intelligence. And they gathered with Khalil al-Hayya and the other Palestinians, and they said that they have firm assurances from Trump that they believe themselves that he is not going to allow Israel to resume the genocide. And there was a lot of discussion about that. And there was requests for certain things on paper and other things. At the end of the day, even a piece of paper, is irrelevant. And I think that the calculation that the Palestinian resistance was left to sort of embrace was that all of these Arab and Islamic countries have put themselves out and said, we are guaranteeing this agreement. And Trump is coming out and saying that he is ending the Gaza war. The stakes for this entire configuration or constellation of the Arab states, Islamic states, and Trump, that it would be very difficult then for Trump to justify allowing Israel to do a full-scale military onslaught again against Gaza. That doesn't mean it's not going to happen. But I think that was, in real political terms, I think it was the fact that you had some of the most the most influential Muslim countries in the world saying, we're endorsing this also. Now you can say these people are, these governments do the bidding of the West, and they were silent for 2 years, and they sat on their hands, and they only issued strongly worded statements. And some of them, like Jordan, and participated in, defending Israel against the defensive attacks that Iran, launched. All of those questions are real. Palestinians know this way better than I do, and they're saying we know all of this. When you push back on it, they say, yes, we understand all of that. But again, they're saying we have a genocide of our people. We need to end that, and we can, but we have to end it while preserving the struggle. And they felt that they did it, but a lot of this rests on the credibility now of those Arab and Islamic nations. These should not be viewed as just kind of bystanders or mediators. In a sense, the entire governance of the Islamic world that is oriented toward, American influence. We're not talking about Iran or Ansar Allah in Yemen or, the resistance in Lebanon. But much of the Arab and Islamic world that deals with the West in this way, they've now put their necks out and they've said, we are guaranteeing this. The populations in all of these countries are watching this. And Hamas's popularity is very high, in many, many countries. And the idea of resisting Israel is higher than it's ever been. Dissatisfaction with the posture of Arab and Islamic states is quite negative, quite high. People are very angry that this has gone on. So I think those dynamics played into it, Nora. And again, there is no real guarantee, and they know that. Giving up all of the Israeli captives, it's a huge gamble. But as Mohammed al-Hindi pointed out, when I was saying, like, isn't this your only leverage? And he said, on a tactical negotiation level, in terms of them agreeing to sit down with us or having to sit down with us, yes. But our steadfastness is the other leverage that we have.
Mm.
And I think there's validity to that because Israel hasn't militarily defeated them. They've militarily slaughtered tens of thousands of Palestinians.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just want to dig deeper a bit on the so-called mediators. For the first almost 2 years of this genocide, we kept hearing that Egypt and Qatar are the mediators, and the negotiations were either in Doha or in Cairo. Now Turkey is involved. Talk about how and why Turkey became involved and what its role is. And also, you mentioned Jared Kushner on the Israeli-American side has become involved. Of course, he's Donald Trump's son-in-law, a ardent and committed and fanatical Zionist who is also, his businesses, as you noted, are funded by many of these Arab Gulf regimes. So we can see kind of the swamp we're dealing with. But talk about the roles of those different parties. And I also want to talk about we want to talk about Tony Blair and all that. We can talk about that too in the other parts of the 20-point plan. But at least Turkey, Kushner, and the mediators. What are you seeing there?
I mean, Turkey. If you look at the past several years, 5-6 years under Erdogan in Turkey, there's been, and even you can go back even further to that, as Turkey started to get involved a decade ago, much more deeply in East Africa, and asserting itself as a player in the world of diplomacy, and also in geopolitical questions. And I think that regarding Gaza and regarding Trump, I think Erdogan in particular wants to create a very complicated relationship between Turkey and Trump. I think that Erdogan's rhetoric about Gaza is militantly pro-Palestine. In fact, openly pro-resistance. He defended Hamas as a legitimate organization on the world stage. Behind the scenes, he does business with Israel. I think that he and Trump are cut from the same cloth in some ways, and I think that Erdogan recognized that Turkey's position in the world between Europe, part of NATO, gateway to the Islamic and Arab world in many significant ways, that Turkey had a chance to assert itself in a very serious way here, while also currying favor with Trump. And so what I understand is that the head of Turkish intelligence was a major pressure actor in this when he stepped onto the scene. And I think Trump felt very satisfied and credited Turkey multiple times as being, if not the decisive player, one of the top decisive players in getting Hamas to agree to this. So I think Turkey also is I think Erdogan is recognizing that this is part of Turkey's campaign to expand its influence in the world and in the world of diplomacy, and certainly in Syria. Turkey is a massive player, and I think Erdogan really is looking at expanding that kind of influence. In the case of Qatar, huge business deals have gone on between the United States and Qatar, but also directly with the Trump family. And I think that, the description that I've had of the Qataris in these negotiations, I get the sense that the Palestinians feel like they have been the most honest brokers of all of these characters in the room. But Qatar just signed this unprecedented NATO Article 5 type agreement with the United States right after, I'm certain, Trump either allowed or was part of the plot to try to assassinate the Hamas leadership. I mean, it's almost impossible to believe that he didn't either greenlight it or allow it to happen, because Qatar has U.S. air defenses. It's the head of CENTCOM. Just they mysteriously, American planes were able to bomb them and American air defense systems didn't take them down. Set that aside, though. Qatar is looking pretty good in its relationship with the United States and had to eat some crow. Oh, we're not going to respond to a country that just bombed us. Okay. Egypt, though, Sisi is committed a coup, overthrew the democratically elected government of Mohamed Morsi, who was very militantly pro-Palestine, comes from the Muslim Brotherhood movement. Morsi dies in prison. Sisi has been backed by the United States, is bankrolled. His regime, in some ways, is holding on by a thread. I'm not predicting it's going to get overthrown tomorrow, but there's fragility there. And when you talk to really sharp Egyptian analysts, they'll say there's a fragility to that regime that may not be apparent to the outside world, but it exists. And there's a population within Egypt that was capable of electing a Muslim Brotherhood member as head of state, the only time they've been allowed to participate in a democratic election. Egypt has its own security interests. It has its own complicated relationship with Israel. It has its own history of being adversarial, but also collaborative with Israel. Egypt has an interest in a severely weakened Islamic resistance existing in Gaza, but not being eliminated for its own security interests. So all of these countries have their own motivations, combined then with massive amounts of money they see at play here if they're able to get the prime positions in some kind of Tony Blair neo-colonialist attempt to do what the neocons thought they were going to do in Iraq when they invaded in 2003. Wipe the place clean, build it up in this free market capitalist way, but make sure that like 10% goes to the big guy. And we're not talking about Biden this time. We're talking about, the Trump family and others. So it's a complicated web. And you hear, I'm not saying anything about because they believe in Palestinian self-determination. I don't even think that's really the motivation. I think that, maybe some of them individually, you get a sense that some of the Qatari officials are speaking sincerely, but it's their populations that want to hear that. What they're talking about is geopolitics, their own influence, their relationship with Trump, their relationship with the United States, their standing in the world, the defense systems that they can get. What kind of support are they going to have if they have to face uprising against their own, their own people against them? These are the considerations at play here.
Jeremy, let's talk. I know people hate talking about it because of all the obvious reasons, but the Tony Blair colonial plan is, it seems like it might be dead in the water. We haven't seen much movement since last week about it. Where do you see this this resurgence?
I don't think it's dead in the water.
No,
okay, I don't think it's dead in the water. Yeah. I mean, I understand why people may think that that's the case. What I was told by Palestinian negotiators is that they've been told that like immediately following the release of the captives, there's an expectation from the White House that negotiations are going to start on these other phases of the plan. And when we started off talking today, I was explaining what I was told was the resistance perspective on how to respond to Trump, which was to break it into two basic parts. And that seems like it's heading toward resolution, but it's also linked to this whole other aspect of it. I think that Trump really believes that he's going to move forward with this. There's going to be questions about are they going to deploy an international force? Is Israel actually going to accept or go along with the deployment of armed Arab forces, in Gaza? Do they think that like some soldiers from the United Arab Emirates are going to go and disarm the Qassam brigades or Soraya al-Quds? Like, how do they envision this working? Do they think that there's not going to be an incident where the Israelis end up doing a drone strike and they kill international forces? And yet the plan says that Israel only has to withdraw from other areas after they're done with this initial phase once an international force takes over and it's certified that disarmament has taken place in the area. That's a massive clause of this. Yeah. So what that means is that they're as of now, what they're saying is there has to be an international force there. So
doesn't that mean this is, aside from the first phase, which we've seen people in Gaza celebrating, they want an end to the massacres and the bombing. They desperately need aid to come in. Nobody's arguing with that. But then isn't this destined to run to run aground as soon as we get to that next phase? Because disarmament is off the table for the resistance, and it would make no sense for them to agree to disarmament while Israel is not only fully armed but continues to occupy Gaza.
Yeah.
And of course, leave aside what it's doing in the West Bank, allowing in a Tony Blair-run colonial dictatorship with the participation of Arab collaborators or Palestinian Authority goons trained by Egypt and Jordan runs fundamentally counter to any notion of Palestinian self-determination that the resistance has vowed to protect. And yet it's impossible to see Israel moving off its position without massive international pressure. But so-called international community is all behind this plan. So is it just too early to say, or can we say that the chances of failure are far higher than the chances of success of any subsequent phases?
I mean, look, I actually would be very interested in your answer on this. I mean, I'm, compared to you, Ali, I mean, I'm a fairly newcomer to this. I mean, I just have to, in full disclosure, I had not been a reporter that had been focused on Palestine, and I always considered that an area that people had to be all in to be covering it, and I was covering other issues, but I felt I've always been active and spoken out about Palestine, but journalistically, when I witnessed the events of October 7th and the aftermath, I felt like I needed to pour all of my focus into this. So I just want that disclaimer that I don't claim to be a lifelong Palestine expert. I've always cared deeply about Palestine, but as a journalist, I've been doing this for 2 years. So with that disclaimer that I'm sitting with experts, and I'm the least expert in the room right now. I think it's implausible that they would be able to successfully implement this just based on the history of Palestine and Palestinian resistance. I think it was Mardawi, the Hamas official, that said when the Tony Blair thing came out, he was interviewed on Al Jazeera, and he said, under what circumstances is Blair going to be arriving? As a Palestinian? As a continuation of Balfour, as a colonialist? What is his legitimacy in coming into Palestine? And it was such a, I mean, on the one hand, it was he was making fun of it, but on the other hand, the core issue is there. You're going to put in the man who was one of the architects of the Iraq War, who is on the payroll of dictators and despots around the world, who is an unindicted war criminal for his crimes against Muslim people already. He's going to be the guy coming to recolonize Palestine. So just baked into it, it's farcical on its surface. On a technical level, though, what they're saying, if you read it carefully, is we're going to allow Palestinians to pretend that they're making decisions. Hamas and the resistance have said that Hamas will relinquish governing authority to a committee of independent Palestinian technocrats. And they put forward recommendations along with other Palestinian bodies. And these are people with experience in diplomacy or in governance. So they've said they'll do it. But in the Trump plan, Blair and this peace board would actually be overseeing those Palestinians. So what they've done is they've taken something that actually could work, where you say, clearly the place has been razed to the ground in this genocide, and there needs to be a reconfiguration and discussion among Palestinian society of how are we going to move forward with governance. That's not what they're doing. They're saying the most popular party in Palestine is not allowed to be here anymore. Palestinian people are not allowed to defend themselves with any weapons. We're going to give you a pretend council, but we're going to have the veto power over it indefinitely. I don't think the Palestinian people are going to accept this, but I do think they're going to try to move forward with it. And what I think we're going to see in the coming weeks is they're going to try to box Hamas and the resistance entirely out of these discussions. They're going to try to circumvent them. And what they're going to realize at the end of the day is that while Hamas started as an Islamic resistance movement, it controversially became a political party, and it won democratic elections. Palestinian Islamic Jihad did not become a political party running in those kinds of elections. They've always maintained the resistance identity. Hamas, though, does a number of things. They were governing. They did policing. They did the payroll. They did picking up the garbage. They ran civil services. When you say, it's like what happened in Iraq, when you issue these de-Baathification orders, anyone connected to the Ba'ath Party, you're no longer allowed to participate in the life of society anymore. You're removing the expert class. You're removing the people that knew how to run the government. Palestinians have a diverse array of opinions about Hamas. Those should be issues for Palestinians to discuss, not for any of the rest of us. But the reality is they're going to need Hamas's expertise. They're going to need Hamas to help with security. And if they do this disastrous attempt at mimicking de-Baathification, they're going to ending up coming begging, saying, wait a minute, these people that used to be part of Hamas, we want you back into the equation. I think Hamas people are kind of aware of that. They're saying gladly we'll give up governance. They've been begging to do it in any of these deals because Osama Hamdan told me it's an albatross around our neck. And many within the Hamas movement feel it was a mistake to become the governing authority. I'm not saying it's a dominant opinion. I'm saying many people have made that point. Maybe it was a mistake. So on a technical level, I think they're going to try it, but it's disastrous in its in its design.
I think, Jeremy, since you did ask me for my opinion,
Yeah.
one thing I think is important to say is that already we saw, as you mentioned, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, come out and reassert these points just in the past hour or so at a press conference with various Arab foreign ministers saying Hamas can have no role, Hamas must be disarmed. Of course, he didn't say anything about Israel being disarmed. And then Germany, which has been one of the biggest enablers of this genocide, came out and they said, oh, we're going to host a donor conference for the reconstruction of Gaza. So all of these countries that enabled the genocide fully are now trying to rebrand themselves as the saviors of Gaza, as the ones who are
Vultures.
going
Yeah.
to help rebuild it, when in fact all of this is the apparatus, all of this aid and reconstruction and development, which of course they will control, is the apparatus for recolonizing Gaza and simply rebranding Israeli occupation as international support, which is exactly what happened in Iraq. I mean, that was the I think the terminal decline of the United Nations is when Kofi Annan, the Secretary General at the time, allowed the United Nations to become a fig leaf for Israeli occupation, US and British and Ukrainian and other occupation of Iraq, all those countries that were involved in that occupation. And that's the danger now. And then they start talking about peace and two-state solution and apple pie and rehabilitating Israel. We're going to see a rush of European leaders to Tel Aviv, meeting with Isaac Herzog and saying, now Israel is okay again. They're going to try to rehabilitate Israel and say, well, we have to talk to Israel because we can't have a future and we can't have peace unless we talk to Israel. And this is an enormous danger. And
Yeah.
we have to ensure that Israel's pariah status is maintained, that its isolation is maintained, that the pursuit of its war criminals and other war criminals is accelerated, and that it just doesn't go back to business as usual, a la the Oslo process, now as an endless ceasefire process in which Israel is in control. So what I want to get to is really to tell everyone who's watching that it's going to be very easy when we see a ceasefire, hopefully aid flooding in, hopefully people in Gaza celebrating. This is not over. You have to keep protesting, escalating, putting pressure, because the global movement, the global uprising for Palestine is the strategic depth of the Palestinian people. That, not the word of Donald Trump, not the word of Qatar or Recep Tayyip Erdogan or Sisi, is the guarantor of the rights of the Palestinian people. So that's really what I want to stress, is no matter what happens in the next few days or weeks, without that global pressure, without the heroism, I beg to differ with Greta Thunberg, without the heroism of the people who've gone on the flotillas, without the heroism of people going out into the streets of the UK and saying, I support Palestine action, which is an absolutely moral position that I'm happy to repeat on this on this live stream. I don't know if that will get us banned in the UK. I'm sorry, but I'm just saying, supporting civil disobedience against genocide is a morally right position. It's the position Martin Luther King would have taken when he said that sometimes normally we obey the law, but you have to sometimes disobey immoral laws. And that's what people in Britain and other parts of the world are doing. All of this is to say that has to continue. Don't let things go back to business as usual. Don't let these monsters, these lizards who did this, now refashion themselves as the instruments of peace and reconstruction. And I apologize again to lizards.
No,
which are
I mean,
beautiful. I always tell
Very
my
sweet
dad this
creatures.
because we see lizards in Jordan, and I always tell him lizards are wonderful creatures, and it's very good luck if you see one in your home. And so again, I did not mean to impugn beautiful lizards.
I'm sure lizards around the world, Ali, are very relieved to hear your clarification. One note to add to that very important analysis is that what's been happening in the occupied West Bank is gravely serious. The largest mass expulsion and displacement campaign since 1967, and in some way, as I was hearing you, Ali, or listening to you, in some ways, it's more important now than ever for people to remain vigilant because all of these crimes have been exposed, because the momentum is there. That the risk always is that if there's the appearance of peace, the veneer of, well, the Gaza thing has been ended. In so many ways, it's just beginning. The fight for the future of Palestine, this chapter might be coming to some resolution in a limited way, but the book is still vast and unwritten. And if people drop the attention span or don't realize there has never been this level of momentum for Palestine ever in history, it has never existed. The serial killer masquerading as a head of state has never been more cornered by world opinion, even within the Republican Party. In the United States, there is unprecedented dissatisfaction with the role that Israel plays in American politics and on the world stage. These are so many unthinkable developments have occurred as a result of October 7th. And I just want to second what you so articulately said, Ali, in saying that more vigilance now has to be deployed. If you actually care about this, then you stick with it, because that's what every Palestinian I know is saying. Even if the bombs stop falling, don't forget us. Don't forget us now. So I think in many ways that is the battle cry from Palestinians now, is don't abandon us and think that because 600 trucks a day start coming in, or we're allowed to put up a tent without it being set on fire by an American missile launched by Israel, that it's over. It's not over. In many ways, it's just beginning.
Jeremy, we could go on for a long time, but I think that's a perfect place to leave this discussion right now. Thank you for all your extraordinary work documenting these negotiations. I have been relying on your work for a very long time in terms of staying abreast of what's happening, and we still have a lot more to learn from you. So we'll be watching your reporting at Dropsite News, which is where people can find it, and we hope you'll also come back again and talk to us here at the Electronic Intifada.
Always. I'm always like, whenever I see a communication from one of you asking me on the show, I get a little jolt of energy through me, in part because I know how many people in Palestine watch this program. And I feel honored to be invited to also speak to the Palestinian audience that I know is very dedicated to this program. So thank you all for all of your vital and urgent work.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Take care.